All right, let's see. Yep, technical difficulties. It's not one thing, it's another. Okay. So, feel like I've already repeated this, but to y'all, you're probably hearing it for the first time. So, it's one of the things that I was thinking about with these technical difficulties is that, it's like I could try to pre-record these things, but then I'd be so how is it just I'd stress too much over trying to get everything just right that I'd probably never do it. And then I'd overthink it and it would just mess up. So that's why I decided, hey, let's just do things live. So that way, warts and all, good or bad, you're just gonna hear me and hey, that's good enough, right? So just gotta roll with the punches. Okay. So for the recording, let's begin. Hailset and Weseth Hale. Welcome back to the Frithstead Fireside, a Setish podcast. I'm Folkwared, and this is episode 4, Óðinn, Investing in Happiness, and Q&A Part 4, recorded live. Well, today was a good day. There was peace at work. There was nothing stressful. And when you have no stress, that's always a positive. But it's been a bit of a cold spell for a while, and the warmer weather's finally here. So after work, the wife and I and my dog, we went rucking in the park. Now, for those of you who don't know what rucking is, it's just wearing a weighted vest and going for a walk or a run. But it felt good to get outside and enjoy some activity in the sun and just get some exercise, get that fresh air. It just makes you feel better. But here we are, already in the second week of February. What the English called Solmonath, the Norse called Goy month, and the Germans Horno. Either way, whatever you call it, 2026 is chugging along. Time's passing. And it just seems like the older you get, the more time just passes faster and faster. But you look outside, you can feel it. The days are getting longer. The light's coming back earlier each morning, and you can feel the season turning towards spring. And many of you are still in the cold areas. So for you, I hope y'all are staying warm. As far as us Texans here, we're ready for the return of the sun and her warmth, which is fitting because Yule was last weekend. All right. I guess it started buffering again. Technical difficulties. We're going to continue to try to push on and see how it goes. But anyway, I was just saying, for those who are in the cold areas, I hope you're staying warm. Us Texans we of course, we don't like the heat of the summer. Nobody does, but we are a warm, a folk who likes the warmth, But anyway, it's fitting, because Yule was last weekend, and that's the time when historically our ancient northern ancestors gathered to honor the gods and celebrate the return of the sun after a time of darkness. The period, I'll mention this, that the period from the winter solstice to Yule, that's known as the wild hunt, the holy ride of the gods, where they cleanse the air of the chaotic forces of bad luck, disease, and famine. The wild hunt, as in German, they call it die wilde Jagd. The English called it the Herla thing, or Herla's thing, thing being an assembly, but Herla is another name of Óðinn. In the Norse referred to it as Asgard's Wraith or Asgard's Ride. This year, though, for me, Yule was a small one, but it was very, very good. It was quiet. It was nice, filled with loved ones, and it's being with those that we love that makes rituals that much more special. That makes the observances, the holidays. Now, with Yule, some of us spread the Veslas over 3 nights, some 2 nights. For us, we condensed it just to 1 night. It's just easier for this year. Of course, however one observes with all the variances, the important thing is that we observe. And in that, we seek to know the gods. We strive to follow the law, and we perform bloat. So in the yearly observances, the midwinter is Yule, the Jólaveisla, the Yule festival, and it's in time, spaced through the year. It's 3 months after winter nights, also known as Winterfylleth, which is the start of winter, and it's 3 months before Sumarmal, the start of summer. And then after Sumarmal, 3 months after that, we have midsummer. But for Yule specifically, like I said, this was a little over a week ago, so I just kind of want to give a recap. But the 3 Yule bloats are Thor's bloat, to Thor for blessings of sustenance to stave off hunger. The Yule bloat to Óðinn for peace in our lives and good luck to ward off strife and misfortune. And then we have Sonar bloat to Lord Freyr, Sexnet, for atonement, to look toward the gods and try and make things right on the things that we've done wrong throughout the year and haven't atoned for, which includes any wrongs that we might be unaware of. So in essence, we're approaching the gods with a righteous will. And given this makes Yule a good time to make pledges and oaths as we seek to make amends for the past by promising to make things better for the future. Well, Yule is past, and I hope y'all had a good time, and it may have been filled with good cheer and lasting memories worthy of remembrance. The vaselets are done, the bloats are offered, the toasts are raised, and now we're back in the ordinary days again, which this is where most of life happens anyway. Between the holy days, in the quiet mornings, the long work days, the evenings when the house settles and just you and yours, and back in the swing of routine, which to me is good. Personally, I thrive in your routine. It's comfortable, and it's routines where I can get both rest and a lot of work done. I have always been a man of structure and order, because when chaos is thrown my way, it throws me for a loop. But in this, I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to live well, not just to survive, not just to get by, not even just to be happy. In that, now when I say be happy, it's like air quotes, be happy, because in that shallow chasing feeling sense that most people mean when they say the word. But I mean something deeper, something steadfast, something our ancestors would have recognized without needing a self-help book to explain it. Even though I do believe that self-help books can serve a beneficial function, but the truth is, Sedianism doesn't promise endless good moods or a life without hardship. But it does offer something solid, a life worth living, a life aligned with Frith, with duty, with the gods, with the folk, and with the way things actually are, reality. Aligned with what we know for a fact is real. Our ancestors, our blood gift, our inheritance. People chase happiness like it's a destination. They think if they just get the right job or the right partner or the right amount in the bank, the right number on the scale, the the right number of likes on their social media posts, then they'll finally feel it. But when it doesn't arrive or when it slips away again, they feel cheated. Happiness isn't something you catch. It's it's something that flows naturally when a person is in right relation to where they're supposed to be, with not only where they're supposed to be, but who they're supposed to be. Where are we with the gods? Where are we with our kin and kith? What's our relationship with the land, with the Alvar? Are we flowing with the current of fate? Or struggling against its threads? When the house is in order, when the deeds match the words, when the small daily acts build frith instead of fraying it, contentment and gratitude tends to show up all on its own, not as a screaming fireworks show, but as a low, warm fire that just holds through the night. And it's my hope that this fire, the Frithstead Fireside, can help you in your journey. That's the whole point of this. I've had to learn this the long way, the hard way, which is the same for most of us. Being hard headed and lacking wisdom, struggling through trials and errors of learning life. Even Óðinn lacked wisdom at one time and went through his own trials and errors, but he never gave up and he earned his title of Allfather. He wasn't born king, nor just merely given to him. There were years where I thought happiness was intensity, the big highs, the big wins, the big emotions. But ultimately that's just foolish dopamine chasing. And it turns out that that kind of fire, it may burn hot and fast, but it quickly leaves you cold and empty when the fuel runs out. These days I'm more interested in that steady burn, the joy that comes from knowing you kept your word, that you showed up for your family and folk, that you offered well to the gods, that you faced what was needed without flinching and overcoming the fear within. And many of us won't admit this, but we all feel fear within at various times with various things. That's perfectly normal. The scary thing is if you never feel the fear. That's when you need to worry. But these things are the soil where good things grow. The days will never be perfect, and with feelings being unreliable and oftentimes volatile, we just need to keep our eyes forward, exerting honesty and repeated effort, focused on the path forward. And as they say, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. But tonight, we're going to continue with a few of the questions that y'all sent my way, the continuing in the Q&A series. And we're going to continue to dig into the faith a bit, clearing up what needs to be cleared, pushing back on what needs to be pushed back on. But we'll get to these at the end of the show. And before we get there, I want to spend some more time talking about investing in happiness. Because like anything that's good in our life and that's lasting comes through hard work, discipline, and steadfast effort, blood, sweat, and tears, as they say. No pain, no gain. Now, I'm not getting off topic here, but I want to set things up by delving into the lore. And it all makes sense and tie together, so just bear with me. Let's talk about Óðinn, all right? People often start with his titles. Allfather, God of wisdom, God of war, etc. Now those labels are true, but they miss what the stories actually show. They miss the depth of who he is. The lore shows us a leader who is never settled. He's always looking ahead. He's always preparing. He wants knowledge, understanding, and wisdom because he knows that fate is leading us toward hard days and difficult times, and he intends to be ready. Now, as my father taught me, and I codified his encouragements, Óðinn also teaches it. And never settle for mediocrity. But remember, effort is worth more than result. So, in other words, good enough is not good enough, and never give up. Just keep on keeping on. Now, in the lore, the world does not begin as a peaceful garden. It begins as something raw and unstable. And out of that early state comes the first great being, Ymir. And from him come many giants, forces of chaos. Óðinn and his brothers, Hunarve and Lotharvili, sacrifice Ymir and build the world from his body, the sea from blood, the land from flesh, the mountains from bone, and the sky from skull. However, a person takes that, literal or symbolic. The point is that order is made through decisive action, and it is maintained against pressure. It's delving into the chaos with a focused energy and intent and manifesting that which is good out of it. Okay. So after this, Óðinn and his brothers shape the first humans from wood that they find on the shore. Now, different versions divide the gifts differently, but the basic idea is the same. Humans are brought into a world that is already dangerous and already shaped by conflict. This is not a story world where everything works out if you just, air quotes, stay positive and trust that you'll be taken care of. Definitely not. But Óðinn becomes a central leader among the Aesir. But he isn't shown as a relaxed king. He is shown as someone who treats leadership like what it is, a great responsibility that requires constant preparation and care. He is tied to war, yes, but not because he loves chaos. He's tied to war because he expects it. He's smart enough to know that the nature of existence and who and what is in existence. He gathers the dead who fall into battle into his hall, Valhall, because he knows that the final crisis is coming, what we know of as Ragnarok, an end-time conflict where gods and enemies meet, and many of the gods are going to die. And we have every reason to believe that at this time, mankind will be waging war as well. And Óðinn was not ignorant of this. In fact, one of the most consistent threads about him is that he seeks knowledge because he knows what is coming. And that leads to the core of his character. He is willing to pay severe costs for this wisdom so that he will know on that final day that he did everything he could, that he never gave up, that he never wavered. Óðinn seeks out Mimir, his maternal uncle, who is connected with deep knowledge. Now, Mimir is not portrayed as a friendly dispenser of secrets. He's a guardian. And in the underworld, there's a well, the central well, called Mimir's Now, Brunner being a Norse word that means well or spring. Okay, so Óðinn wants to drink from it because he knows it contains the primordial waters of existence itself. And in consuming the creative source, expand his evolution and increase his understanding and power to act. Okay, but he cannot just take it. A price is demanded. That's another example of the gift for a gift principle. And as the lore relates, the price was his eye. He gave up an eye to drink from the well. And he received great understanding and wisdom, but at that great cost. The point is that wisdom isn't treated like a free upgrade. You don't gain deep sight without losing something. It takes the school of hard knocks and the times of struggle. And whatever you think that I represents for us in our lives, whether comfort, innocence, pride, easy certainty, this story teaches the same lesson, that real knowledge costs you. And the payment is not symbolic, but it's very real in the moment that you pay it. Like we discussed last episode when we mentioned how duty reveals itself when you pay the cost. Okay, so then comes the episode that makes Óðinn's pattern unmistakable. He doesn't only trade an eye, he also undergoes a great ordeal to gain the runes, not just the letters themselves, but the hidden deeper knowledge behind them, the mystery, the messages they tell. He described it as this: I know that I hung on a wind-tossed tree 9 nights, wounded by my spear, given to Óðinn, myself given to myself, and on that tree of which no one know from what root it springs. No one gave me bread nor a horn of drink. I peered downward, I took up the runar, wailing, I learned them. Then I fell down thence. So, to understand what the story is getting at, no one can do this work for you. No one can just gift you knowledge or understanding or wisdom unless you are able to become the kind that is able to hold it, able to retain it, and allow it to be a part of you, a part of who you are. A teacher can teach, a friend can teach, but at the end of the day, if you are unwilling to listen and you don't have, as they say, ears to hear, then growth is not going to happen. It's definitely a two-way street. And this is why Óðinn is the Allfather, the High King of all the gods and man. Because he put in the hard work and he had the ears to hear. Now, at the end of that ordeal, he takes up the runes. He learns, and therefore he changes. The more one learns, the more one changes and becomes something different, becomes really a new creation. And I can actually say that in my own life. I've gone through many, many, many phases of learning where, I learn. And then once that understanding from the learning comes, my personality will change. And don't get me wrong, I'm still the same person inside. My nature is still me, but I've evolved, I've grown, I've matured. And really maturity is one of the things that I should mention, is because when you knowledge is one thing, but when you get the understanding, then you can see how it all works. And then once you understand how it all works, then that's where wisdom comes, and that is knowing how and when and if to even apply that knowledge. And that is maturity, because we all know when you're immature, your actions can be suspect, even if the intentions are good and pure and right, but so yeah, like Óðinn, he did what it took to gain the knowledge, that which is sought after, his blood, his sweat, his tears. And in doing so, he learned the mighty Galder songs, the spells, the words of power. And there's a pattern that we see here. And Óðinn admits that he's limited. All right. He's always striving forward, never afraid of the hard work. He identifies the source of wisdom that'll serve his interests. And upon learning the cost to obtain that which he seeks, he pays a cost to achieve that which is necessary for him to be changed. Then he receives the knowledge that increases his capability, and therefore he rises above his limitations. Time, effort, dedication. Again, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And it begins with taking your pride and your hubris and setting it aside, because you cannot grow and become a man or a woman, a true man or woman, if you continually let pride and hubris just get in your way. And I can speak from experience on that. As I said a while back, I've learned the long way. I took the long way. I took the hard road. And I'm not saying I've 100% arrived, because I have not. But I'm a lot further along than I used to be. And that is a celebration. And it doesn't matter if where you're at in your life, if you can look back at, let's say, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and are you still the same, or have you grown and matured? That's the things that you need to look at. And whether you've moved a little bit or a lot, it's still cause for celebration, because progress, however big or small, is cause for celebration. Always look for that silver lining and stay positive. It means everything. But everything we're talking about, this is why we need to take the stories and the lore seriously. And we cannot treat them like just entertainment or mere fairy tales, because they're more than that. They are our training material. And when we understand the lore, we have a blueprint to follow. It's like Aesop's fables. It's ultimately, it's no different. It's, there's always a teachable moment in these accounts, in these stories. Now, there's another well-known story that shows that same pattern, but in a different way. We have the mead of poetry. And the mead of poetry is the mead that grants poetic skill and a sharp mind with skilled wordcraft. Naturally, of course, Óðinn wants it. And he doesn't ask politely or wait for someone to hand it over. He uses planning, cunning, persuasion, and a heck of a lot of risk. He puts himself into danger, and he puts in that hard work. But through all of his efforts, he gets the mead. His quest for the mead of poetry is a struggle over obtaining the mead from one who has it but shouldn't, and as it would likely, be misused for ill. And it fits his overall character, which, Óðinn is willing to be blamed, willing to be hunted, willing to endure consequences, whatever it takes, because he is gathering every tool that he can and every weapon to his arsenal, so that he can be prepared for Ragnarok when it comes. This is also where you see something important. Óðinn is not, quote unquote, a pure figure in the way that some people want our gods or heroes to be. He can be very generous, but he can also be ruthless. He keeps loyalty with those he honors, but he can be dangerous to those outside Frith. The myths they don't present him as simple. He's an imperfect god, but he's a god who's worthy of his position, and a god worthy of worship. Óðinn is also often described with a spear, and he's linked to ravens, Hugin, and Munin, who travel and return with information. And he's linked to wolves as well, Gary and Freki, which both names mean greedy or eager. But not always should greedy have a negative connotation. For instance, I, myself, like Óðinn, am always greedy to know more, to obtain that which will elevate me, to never stop learning. It's a very hard path. It's a very lonely path. It can be sad and depressing at times, but it's very, very rewarding. And you look at the pros and the cons, and the pros far outweigh the cons. We must learn from the Allfather. Awareness, intelligence gathering, and readiness. Always striving to have a plan of action. So, if you've never heard these stories, here's a lesson. Óðinn is a figure who refuses to rely on comfort. When he lacks what he needs, he doesn't pretend. He seeks to obtain. And when a price is demanded, he pays it. He becomes the kind of being who can carry more and more responsibility because it's his nature to always rise above for the greater good. But Óðinn's story isn't about feeling better. It's a story about becoming capable, becoming steady, and useful under pressure. His is a story of duty, of dedication, steadfast perseverance, of knowing what you want and working hard to get it despite the difficulty, of stepping up and doing what has to be done to achieve greatness. Okay, so now that we've set the foundation with Óðinn, right? Here's why I started there and why I'm not getting off track and why it's not a detour, as I haven't left the topic of happiness. I'm just setting things up. And okay, I've mentioned this a time or two, and I have a little bit here and there. I'm repeating myself, but it's intentional. Um, there's a pattern that we see in the lore. Again, it's not just a collection of stories. It can be viewed as a map of how growth and change actually works. Óðinn doesn't become wiser because the world is what he thinks it should be. He becomes wiser because he faces what's real. He identifies what he needs, and then he pays the internal cost to become the kind of being who can hold that power without breaking. Now, take this exact structure, the structure and pattern that we've outlined with Óðinn, and look at what most people do today when they chase happiness. All right. Most people invest hard in what's easiest to point at, their circumstances. They try to feel better by changing what's around them, their location, their possessions, status, their relationships, their routines, their appearance, social approval, what have you. Now, I want to say this clearly so that there's no misunderstanding, okay? Our circumstances, those things do matter. I mean, if your environment is unsafe, if you're in a toxic relationship, if you can't pay your bills, if you have no structure at all, and your life is a bit chaotic, then yes, changing circumstances can be necessary because you have to take care of yourself. And being necessary, it becomes part of our duty in the process of stabilizing at the home. But what I'm saying is that once the basic needs are met, okay, once you've got the floor under your feet, most people continue to keep pouring everything they have into these same externals and then wonder why it doesn't hold. They keep chasing the next upgrade like it's going to finally fix the inside. They keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. And that isn't strategy. As we've all heard it before, that's insanity. And it doesn't, more often than not, you know, con- continually changing the circumstances or the externals. Okay, it more times than not, it doesn't produce lasting change. If one puts on new, fresh, and clean clothes every day but doesn't shower, the body will rot despite the new clothes, the changing of the externals. And this is where science lines up with the lore in a way that's honestly hard to ignore. Okay, let's get into some science here, um, which to me is the fun part. I love science. In 2005, there's a psychological model, okay, and it's called the Sustainable Happiness Model. And to summarize it, it's like this, okay? Okay, about 50% of long-term happiness differences are tied to a baseline, and that is your temperament, your heritable tendencies, the emotional range that you start with. Maybe we can call this fate, the urlog established for us in the weird of our lives. So that's the 50%. All right. Now the 10%, about 10% comes from your life circumstances. That is your income, relationship status, where you live, what you own, etc. As we've stated, the externals, right? Now, to make up the difference, we have a third category, and that's the 40%. The 40% comes from intentional activity. That is what you practice. That is your cognitive, behavioral, uh, your habits, the internals, if you will. Okay. Now, I'll say what needs to be said. Okay. These are not, quote unquote, sacred numbers. They're not holy writ, but they are a scientifically verified framework, a useful way to stop people from making the same bad investment over and over and over again. And the point is the lesson, because when you look at the percentage breakdown, stop pouring all your effort into the asset that yields the smallest rate of return, which is that 10%. In a way, you can kind of look at happiness using the analogy of like an investment portfolio, with you investing in your assets and what's your rate of return. So let's start with the 10% asset, because this, like I said, this is what most people focus on heavily. They put most of their investment into that 10% rate of return asset. Circumstances are like a low yield account, not worthless or nothing, but it's limited. It's, our circumstances, the externals, are limited because human beings adapt. And that adaptation is called the hedonic adaptation. Sometimes it's referred to as the hedonic treadmill, which, let me explain, that's the tendency for the emotional impact of changes to fade over time as you drift back toward your baseline. Okay. So hedonic means relating to or pursuing pleasure. Well, a couple more common terms, a little more well known, are hedonism and hedonist. Hedonism is the philosophical belief that happiness, particularly pleasure, is the highest good in life, and therefore a hedonist is someone who adopts hedonism as a philosophical tenet of their core belief system. All right. So devoting most of your time and effort to changing your circumstances, the externals, is essentially a hedonistic practice. You keep the treadmill running like a hamster on a wheel. You're getting nowhere except for those temporary treats that spike dopamine, make you feel good, and then it fades and just leaves you wanting more. Hence the phrasing hedonic treadmill, right? But to me, it sounds like a drug addict, doesn't it? But people do become addicted to to dopamine. And so it really is an addiction thing. But okay, so yes, you get the new car, you feel great, then it becomes your car. You get the promotion, awesome, you feel great, then it just becomes your job. You move to a new place, new experiences, you feel great, then it just becomes where you live. Well, you meet the new person and you feel great. Well, then the honeymoon phase is over and the relationship just becomes daily life. Now, this doesn't mean that those changes were fake. It just means that the return declines. Your nervous system normalizes, your expectations rise, and then you start chasing the next hit. This is like people chasing happiness as if it's a shopping trip. They keep redecorating the outside, hoping it'll change the inside, but it doesn't, and it never does. Okay, so we've looked at the 10% asset, the circumstances, the externals. Well, now let's look at the 50% asset, the fixed capital, that which is fated to be and we cannot change. This is your default range, your home base, your true baseline. Look at it like this. Some people are naturally more anxious, others calm and worry-free. Some naturally more upbeat, others laid back. Some optimistic, others always negative. Some people recover quickly from stress. Some may carry it for a long time and it weighs them down. Some people have minds that run fast and loud. Others are slow. We have extroverts. We have introverts. We have ambiverts. You know, the inborn characteristics which make up the rules and board in which we play the game of life. Our genetics and fated soul qualities. You know, twin studies research has been used to argue the heritable component in the studies consistently across the board always fall, give or take, plus or minus, about 50%. So here's the point. Fixed assets doesn't mean you're doomed. It doesn't mean just give up. That's a defeatist attitude that's going to set yourself up for failure every time. But it just means it helps to be truthful about your starting conditions. Know thyself, right? We must be open to analyzing ourselves and peering into that darkness that exists within, as well as the light that shines from within. Introspection. It's a great tool. It's a practice that'll never let you down, even if it exposes that which is difficult to face. For without knowing the darkness, it can't be brought into the light and grow into something beautiful. He who refuses to learn and admit his baseline does one of two things. He pretends he's fine, that he's right, but then wonders why he keeps snapping in anger, mentally or emotionally crashing, or becoming numb, or burning bridges and pushing everyone away. Or two, he shames himself for not having someone else's temperament or ability. And then that route, depression and loneliness will build until he just eventually becomes a shell of what he has the potential to be. Because both of those are counterproductive to healing. And healing is what we all need as men and women. Because we all have trauma, every single one of us. And we all have things that we gripe about. We all have things that we can allow to be that weight that holds us down. Or we can work hard to remove those weights. And at the end of the day, those weights that we can't move, at least make them light enough to where we can carry them, right? But neither of those two builds frith with others. Um, Neither of those are conducive to having a relationship of any kind, and neither of those are honest and useful. Going back to the pretending you're fine or right, and then wonders why everyone, why things keep happening, or the one who shames themselves and just constantly wishes, why can't I be like that person? None of those two paths are just not where it's at. And this is where the stories of Óðinn matter. Óðinn starts by admitting that he's not yet enough for what's coming. And that's not weakness. That is wisdom. A man who can't say, this is my baseline, can't properly create a plan, and therefore any attempt to engage in a plan will likely result in failure. And if you can't plan, you can't lead your own life, even if you think you are. So the baseline asset, the 50%, the faded aspects of yourself, it's about management. You work with what you have. You learn your triggers. You learn what steadies you. You learn what unnerves you. You learn to work with what you have. You stop making life decisions like you're trying to outrun your own nature, because you can't. For instance, say you don't like crowds, but you want a social life. So get out of your comfort zone. But when you go to places, hang out on the periphery instead of the group center, or get some food and find a table or a spot where there are just a few eating. For this type of person, it'll be much easier to visit over food in a small group than in a crowd where large circles can form and conversations can get loud and chaotic. So it's about recognizing who you are and managing your assets. It's about thinking smarter, not harder. So it's not about like saying, oh, well, I'm not good with crowds, so therefore I'm not going to go to this social event, even though I want to have friends. That's being a defeatist and just saying, well, that's just the way I am. Well, that ultimately is a poor attitude, because yes, you may be a certain way, but if you learn how to manage the way, you manage your baseline, then you can experience so much more in life. There's just so much out there. And if we're always holding ourselves back, sometimes we just have to get out of our own way and stop becoming our worst enemy. So, okay, let's move on. Let's discuss the 40% asset, our intentional activity in our growth portfolio. This is the part that most people underfund, but this is where the real returns live. Intentional activity essentially means this: what you practice consistently and deliberately, the habits and disciplines that shape your mind's default settings, right? So these things include they include things like how you talk to yourself, whether you dwell on things or shift your focus and move on, whether you feed gratitude or train bitterness, whether you repair relationships or let pride destroy them, whether you live with structure or live in chaos, whether you choose purpose or drift, whether you choose to fight for success or wallow in defeat, right? Practices like gratitude, kindness, goal setting, and mindfulness can greatly improve your well-being, especially when you practice consistently and in a way that fits within your 50% faded baseline. And that fit matters. If you treat these practices like a novelty, like a trendy trick, you'll drop them the minute life gets busy or difficult, because it isn't you. And this is why fake it till you make it never works. And believe me, I am a person who used to believe that fake it till you make it works. I've said that 100 times over, but I've learned that that it doesn't work. That's why quote unquote diets never work, because it's relying on force of effort to get you through, and willpower alone will never ever get you there. That's why they say don't diet, do lifestyle change, right? Because that's what it takes. If we treat the practicing of new thinking like training, then they compound. And as time passes, it becomes easier and easier to the point of becoming who you are as a person. You start gaining the ability to rewire your brain, and you will become a different person. You will become a better person. And the word compound matters. This is the difference between a quick emotional spike and a stable inner foundation. So, circumstances, the 10%, fade because your brain adapts. Your inner nature, the 50%, will generally stay the same, but the inner practices, the 40%, they don't fade the same way because they change the equipment that you're using to meet life. Over time, the practice becomes you. You become harder to knock off center. You don't need perfect conditions to be steady. You build a kind of peace that survives bad weeks. Think of it like this, a chain of events, okay? You have a vision of who you want to be. You establish a goal. You create a strategy. You engage in new habits. Repetition is key, with small rewards along the way. Then, over time, your identity begins to shift. Then you have a new lifestyle, a new baseline, and then voila, you're a new person. Now, despite the 40% rate of return, which is, a pretty high rate of return, come on now, but most people avoid this asset because it's slow. It's not glamorous. It doesn't give you a dramatic story. It's repetition. It's restraint. It's doing the right thing when no one claps, and it's hard. As it's playing the long game, it just takes time. But that is why it works. So here it is, okay? If you treat happiness like a portfolio, most people keep dumping all of their efforts into that 10% asset, the circumstances, the externals, and then they wonder why they still feel poor inside. And they don't learn the reality of the 50%, who they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the wise approach, the Óðinnic approach, is not to ignore your circumstances, but to just put them in their proper place. So stabilize the 10% externals enough so that you can function, right? Then accept your 50% baseline honestly and plan around it. Then invest heavily in the 40% inner systems that actually generate lasting returns. In the lore, in the stories of our gods and heroes, truth and growth exist in lessons to be learned. So keep this in mind, because we're returning back to Óðinn. Like I said, there's no rabbit trailing here. It's all tying together. This is where everything that we just covered comes together, okay? We just laid out the happiness portfolio via the sustainable happiness model with the 10% circumstances, 50%, inborn baseline, and the 40% intentional activity. So let's get back to the lore. First, Óðinn begins with his baseline, the 50% reality check. He doesn't start with denial, nor does he stand in front of the future and say, I got it. It'll be fine. I'll figure it out when it happens. That is the mindset of someone who lacks the capability to make real change. They could be naive or maybe just filled with arrogant hubris, but Óðinn he instead looks at what's coming and he admits that truth, that there are great deeds that must be done, but he's not yet equipped to do them. And he recognizes that he's young, inexperienced, and lacking the power needed. He recognized his 50% baseline and utilized his inborn disposition of the ever wandering knowledge seeker to make the necessary changes to his 10% externals. And after all, he did earn the position as Allfather, didn't he? He established a goal and he discovered which of the 10% asset that he needed to invest in. But he focused even greater effort to the 40% with dedicated intentional activity. He knew he needed more than where he was at, right? And this is the first move of wisdom. It's clear accounting, right? Wisdom is the element of one's personal character that enables one to use the knowledge that they have for the greatest good, to know how to apply the right knowledge. Wisdom gives someone the ability to make a decision based on the combination of knowledge and experience, with the most important element, intuitive understanding. For knowledge without understanding is nearly useless. And this maps directly onto the 50% baseline. You know, your baseline is real. Your temperament is real. Your nervous system has a default setting. Your soul has its weight and its lean. Some are naturally more reactive. Some, as said before, steadier. Some are built for crowds. Some are love to be surrounded by people. You know, these aren't moral failings. There's our starting conditions. If you refuse to acknowledge them, you won't build a strategy. You'll just build fantasies and just collect failures. And this is why I keep repeating this, and I suppose other things. Because repetition helps you remember. It helps me remember. The man who will not face his baseline will borrow confidence that he doesn't have and call it courage. That's the fake it till you make it scenario. I'm going to repeat that because it's worth repeating. The man who will not face his baseline will borrow confidence he doesn't have and call it courage. Now, when pressure hits, he breaks with himself and everyone around him, again, because it's not him. But Óðinn doesn't do that. He doesn't lie about his baseline. That's where he starts. And second, we can look at Mimersbrunner as a tempting 10% asset, the external upgrade. As we look at the well, Mimersbrunner is presented as something external that can help him. One drink could help him. And that is exactly how modern people talk about the next upgrade. If I just get that job, I'll finally be okay. If I just move, I'll finally be okay. If I just fix my relationship, it'll all be okay. If I get more money, more attention, more recognition, comfort, what have you, it's going to be okay. Right. And again, just like we said previously, some circumstance changes are necessary. Like if your house is on fire, you don't meditate on it. You leave the house. If your environment is toxic, you can't necessarily just positive think your way out of it. You have to change your environment. That's duty, that's common sense. Well, it should be. But here's the trap. Okay. Once the basics are stable, people keep treating circumstances like salvation. And we can call that the well fantasy. One drink and I'm set. But the Lord blocks that fantasy, The well is not a vending machine. Mimer is not a pushover. The gift is not handed out to whoever wants it. And it's not because Mimer is cruel. It's because this is how reality works. If power is given to the unfit, the result is ruin. So the 10% asset lesson is built right into the myth. External aid exists, but it's limited, and it's not the source of transformation, but it's the vehicle, right? Not the source of transformation, but the vehicle. You can drink and still remain untrained. You can upgrade and still remain unstable. You can win and still remain weak. Like winning the battles but losing the war. That's hedonic adaptation in myth form. External boosts do not automatically change the person receiving them. Okay, point is, changing the 10% without simultaneously changing the 40% are actions in futility, right? So, and we see this in Óðinn using the holy waters of Mimersbrunner, the 10%, to focus change on his 40%, the attaining of wisdom. And Óðinn chooses the compounding investment, the 40% growth portfolio. And the turning point in the Óðinn story is not the well. The turning point is what he does to become worthy, that compounding investment. He undergoes the ordeal. He gives up comfort. He accepts pain. He stays there 9 nights, no bread, no drink, wounded, alone, focused, dedicated. He peers downward. He takes up the runes. He learns them through cost, through his blood, sweat, and tears, through tremendous hard work and suffering. And only then does he rise with something new inside of him, something that becomes capability, not just temporary dopamine chasing mood. And, this is the part that most people hate because it's slow. Oftentimes, it's a multi-year process. It's personal and it can't be faked. It's peering into the inner depths of yourself and coming to terms with your weaknesses, inadequacies, and your failures. And this is most of all hard. It's extremely hard. But if we want to be happy, this is what must be done. We must hang on our own tree. This is the 40% asset: intentional activity, training, discipline, repetition. Think about what that ordeal represents in your life. Choosing order, structure instead of chaos. Choosing restraint instead of impulse. Choosing honest self-talk instead of self-poisoning. Choosing repair over pride, gratitude over bitterness. Choosing relationships over anger, self-accountability over blaming others. Choosing purpose over drift. Consistency and integrity, even when no one is watching. Choosing the hard thing today so tomorrow is easier to carry. Value analysis. Weighing the short-term benefit over the long-term cost. That is compounding investment, and that is why it works. Because circumstances fade and your baseline remains, but those inner practices, if done consistently, will reshape your default reactions. Over time, you become steadier, you become harder to destabilize, and you stop needing perfect conditions to be at peace. That's what most people actually mean when they say they want happiness. They don't mean constant pleasure. They really mean stability. They mean inner order. They mean waking up without negative thoughts and feelings. They mean not being controlled by every bad day or every bad thing that comes their way. They mean being able to face life without buckling under the pressure. And all of this comes from the 40% asset. Because chasing the externals constantly without doing the inner work doesn't just fail to make you happy, it makes you unreliable. It makes you reactive. It makes you a danger to having frith with others. Your own peace, your household's peace, your relationships, your community, all become unreliable. When a man is untrained inside, he brings chaos wherever he goes. And then he wonders, why is it like this? He can have all the nice furniture, nice things, clothes, money, a prestigious new title to his name even. But those things don't matter. When a man is trained, when he invests in the inner systems, he carries order with him and he builds it as he grows. He becomes someone others can trust. He becomes someone who can bear responsibility under strain. And that's why Óðinn's story matters. It's not entertainment, nor is it just some fictional story, because it's not. It's real. It's instruction. So invest like a wise man, not like a desperate man. So, okay. So to close, here's what I want you to do. To recap a little bit. Stabilize the 10%. Handle your obvious problems. Fix what is unsafe. Reduce needless chaos. Get your basics in order. This is housekeeping, not salvation, mind you. Then tell the truth about the 50%. Name your baseline. Learn your triggers. Learn what steadies you. Stop pretending you're built like someone else. Stop shaming yourself for being human. This is just honest planning and preparation. Then commit to that 40% and treat it like training. Pick practices that fit you, but keep them small and then repeat them. Track them. Don't make it dramatic, just make it steady. Make it real. The goal is not to feel amazing for one day. The goal is to become someone that is steady for a lifetime. And for more on this, refer back to episode 3, where we discussed the psychology of motivation, as everything that we're discussing tonight is an extension of that. And keep this in mind. The work that actually changes you is usually the work that nobody claps for. And that's why many avoid it. That's why it's rare, but that's also why it has power. So when you feel yourself chasing that next upgrade, when you feel that itch that says, if I just get this or that, I'll be okay, remember Óðinn at the well at Mimersbrunner. And in our lives, we have our own wells, and that help exists. Help exists, but the truth stands. The gift doesn't transform the untrained. So train. Become fit in both body and mind. Then receive what life has to offer without letting it ruin you. Accept your weird as it unfolds. Accept your fate, but act where you can act. Okay, so let's shift gears and move onto the closing section of our episode. Everything that we've talked about so far has been about learning how to understand and improve our lives, right? How to become the kind of person who will live a happy and successful life when their final day comes. As I like to say, to leave a legacy worthy of remembrance. At the Frithstead Fireside, we talk about faith, but we also talk a lot about life and how to understand things, the tangibles and the intangibles of real life, the one that we live every day, things that matter and carry weight. Real life looks like this. At some point in your life, you begin to take things seriously, and then you look around and realize that you're not alone. You've got family, friends, acquaintances, you have history, and all these people have their issues the same as you have yours. In a way, we're all broken. But then you realize that we're all in this together. And many of the people in our lives don't think like us. They don't know what we know. And many, to be honest, might not even like us. Or maybe they just don't understand us. But when real life circles back to your faith, strife can occur between our faith and the rest of our lives. Between us with our faith inside and others. Now, like to the heathen, you've got people that you dearly love who are Christian or who were raised Christian or both. So in this life, I want to find the right words here. Okay, we strive to live with integrity and respect without blowing up our households and relationships, right? But how do we maintain relationships? Well, the best way that I know is through communication, which again is not always easy and oftentimes it's hard, but communication is key. And ultimately, this is why I really love the Q&A series that we've been doing over the course of now 4 episodes now of the Frithstead Fireside. But with that, I'll close the show by answering a few questions, okay, that y'all sent my way. So let's get on to it before I just start rambling on too much. Okay, there's going to be 3 questions that I'm going to go over for this episode. Does Christianity and heathenry have to be separate? Can you be a heathen and a Christian? And is there overlap between heathenry and Christianity? Okay, so these 3 questions are really different ways of asking one bigger question, right? They're asking about compatibility. And more specifically, they're asking where the lines of loyalty and practice actually sit, right? Are Christianity and heathenry compatible? And if so, in what ways? Belief, worship, practice, values? When someone asks, do they have to be separate? What they're really asking is, where's the boundary? Are these 2 systems compatible at the root, or do they contradict each other in a way that forces separation? When someone asks, can you be both? What they're really asking is, can one person live out in real life without breaking loyalty? Not just, can I like parts of both, but who do you pray to? Who do you offer to? What do you refuse? And can you do that without contradiction, without syncretizing and changing one religion into something else? Is there overlap? Is there ground that can be shared? Are there virtues, disciplines, or ways of living that line up, even if the religions aren't the same thing? So, those are the questions and the thoughts surrounding them, and that's the real issue underneath them is compatibility, with a focus on where belief and worship clash, where practices can align, and what values can genuinely be held in common. So, does Christianity and heathenry have to be separate? Well, in terms of belief, that is a firm yes, because the foundations are not the same. Traditional heathenry, what we call Setianism, is polytheist in a strict way. The gods and goddesses are real powers who exist within existence, and the tradition explicitly rejects a singular godhead, and other monotheistic frameworks are very much incompatible with the Germanic faith. That single point already right there, just right off the bat, sets a hard boundary. Christianity in its standard form is structured around one supreme God who exists outside existence. As he's viewed. So if you try to blend the 2 at a level of belief, who God is, what the divine is, how many divine powers exist, you're not harmonizing, but replacing one foundation with another. And, every house rests upon its foundation. Setianism, traditional heathenry, rejects syncretism, which is the mixing of pantheons, importing foreign religious elements, or turning the faith into a mixed bag of preferences, right? So yes, they are and must be kept distinct in belief and worship. Otherwise, the faith ceases to be, and therefore one cannot be a heathen and a Christian. For when one adopts a foreign faith or mixes in foreign elements, it has a domino effect, and one's culture and history begins to be changed, perverted, and ultimately watered down until its eventual extinction. Now, while it's true that both faiths will have commonalities, as all faiths do, ultimately, oil and water don't mix. To mix heathenry and Christianity, we're talking about removing European culture and heritage and replacing elements with Middle Eastern elements. When the two peoples and ideologies are vastly different. Europe and the Middle East are racially, culturally, psychologically, and spiritually different. So by merging them, we're saying that Middle Eastern elements are more important and better than our own European elements. And if that's the case, why not continue down the slippery slope and incorporate Taoism, Hinduism, West African Orisa, or Shintoism, right? Where do you draw the line? This is where the logic follows, right? So now, if someone wants to go this route, by all means, I hold no ill will. But again, returning to the discussion from episode 1, why would you leave your own family to adopt another when your own family is here for you, loves you, and can offer you everything that you need? It's just a question but it's with an underlying plea that I hope comes across as a hard love, quote unquote, type of thought, question, encouragement, because that's how I mean it. Um, I'll post a link in the description whenever this is posted to YouTube and Spotify and Rumble and various places, Telegram, Facebook. But I'll post a link in the description. But I do strongly urge everyone to read our Sedish tenets. They exist as an answer to such questions, and they provide the theological, doctrinal foundation of our faith, right? But I'll address the question on there being overlap between heathenry and Christianity. So, yes, there can be overlap in certain values and outward moral instincts, but that overlap does not equal compatibility in a belief or worship, right? See, many faiths share the same attributes or beliefs, so overlapping does exist in a way that many older traditions overlap, right? Things like community duty, moral restraint, reverence, sacrifice, the seriousness of oath, standard of conduct, etc. Shared human realities create shared moral pressures. We're all human, but shared values doesn't erase conflicting metaphysics. You can respect overlap without confusing it for unity or sameness. You can acknowledge similarities while still keeping your boundaries intact, because your faith is wholly your own, and it is not meant to be diluted into a hybrid, new age thing. So, are Christianity and heathenry compatible in belief? No, because traditional heathenry explicitly rejects monotheistic frameworks as incompatible. In worship, no, because Sedish doctrine explicitly rejects the blending of foreign belief systems, and Christianity demands clear and undivided devotion to the Jewish God. In practice, because, well, like belief, boundaries are explicit. But what about values, right? Yes, there can be overlap, but overlap doesn't mean that you merge religions into one life without obvious and evident, contradictions emerging. So, um, it's where am I? Okay, so let me get my thoughts here. Okay, if a person is coming out of Christianity and that happens a lot. It's more and more these days. The the setish answer is not hate that religion, because a lot of people, if they're when they're leaving Christianity or any religion for that matter, they get angry. And we as traditional heathens are very much opposed to anti-Christian reactionism. It's not a good place to be. It's not healthy. Uh, no one needs, no one needs that negativity around them, right? And this goes back to everything we've been talking about on investing in happiness. But one does need to be honest with themselves and not pretend that they can serve two incompatible ideologies and then call it integrity, because truth is built on clarity, right? So hopefully that answered those questions. But at this point, I believe we've pretty much covered everything that I've intended to cover. Uh, Gone on for a little while now. So we'll conclude this episode, and I thank you for joining me. Much appreciation, right? I do appreciate it for real. That's what the Frithstead is all about. That's why we sitting by the fireside and just you know having a conversation, sharing some truth. Because if the point is to always learn, to grow, and to get better. And our task is simple: meet life with courage, honor, and good intentions. And remember, we're to bit full rad swageth ahio swahil shall. Fate is fully fixed, and she goes ever as she shall. So until next time, stay strong, stay true, and hold fast to your faith, your kin, and your folk. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the ancestors, and hail the Frithstead. I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.